Hello, everyone. Welcome to From Response to Resilience. Today, we'll be looking at how will we advance our equitable well-being together. The next installment of our North Sound ACH partner convening. And I want to invite Liz Baxter to open us up with a land acknowledgement and a welcome.
Thanks, David. Just want to again welcome everybody to this session today. You know, we've had 3 prior sessions, and I know that you all that are jumping on are incredibly busy in the work that you're doing. So probably first just want to express gratitude for all of the service and care and work that you're doing to take care of people across the region. We are really looking forward to this session. There's obviously not an easy way to replace 2 full days of being in person with each other with Zoom, but we're hoping today is going to be interactive and engaging. We're hoping that for both days. And so I do want to start with our land acknowledgement statement. Even though we are in this virtual Zoom space, it's just really important for us to recognize and honor the place where we ourselves and where you are currently sitting. So we begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. And each time that we share this, we also share this link to nativeland.ca, which is a site managed by the University of British Columbia. So we're hoping that at some point in time between today and our session tomorrow that you have a chance to go to that link, knowing that we're all in different places now across the country, and just explore the place where you are today and see some of its history. We're really excited because since last summer, we've been working with the team from Community Initiatives, and we're incredibly grateful for them today. They have done the majority of the work in planning these sessions that we've been having, really weaving together the work that we're doing here with things that are happening elsewhere across the country. And so we're just also grateful for all of you to be on this journey with us. And so David, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for that land acknowledgement. We're also grateful for you all sharing your time with us, and we want to invite everyone who's on the call now to please let us know who's in our virtual room by chatting in your name and organization and pronouns. I will be your host today, as Liz mentioned, along with my Community Initiatives colleagues, Monty Roulier and Stacy Wegley, and there's a number of folks behind the scenes making sure that it looks as seamless as possible as well. In addition to chatting in your names, pronouns, and organization into the chat feature, if you haven't done so already, you may go into your own little video icon and rename yourself with your name, organization, and pronouns as well. And at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stacy Wegley, who's going to help us get oriented for our time together here today. Stacy?
Thanks, David, and thanks again, Liz. Just want to hit a couple of high points for our working agreements as we share time together today and offer a little bit of view to our sort of arc forward. And as we get started, just wanting to know that if, as always, and as Liz said, just really value your time, and we'll be starting and ending on time together today, as well as offering a break sort of mid-session so that you can, again, stand up, stretch, check on other things for a moment. We do encourage and invite, and while we aren't able yet to be physically present with one another, for those of you who are able to be able to turn on your cameras and to provide the opportunity for us to be able to really see one another, read both, have both the value of the verbal as well as the non-verbal feedback in our ongoing conversations. If you're still getting oriented to Zoom, perhaps, your icons for being able to control your screen are available at the bottom of the screen if you're on your computer, and likely to be at the top of your screen if you're on a tablet or your phone. But if you hover over with your mouse, you can see you open up a mute button as well as a video button. Over the course of the day, there'll be lots of opportunity to raise your hand and enter the room with your voice, in addition to the ongoing chat conversation. If you'll please mute between speaking opportunities, and look forward to your additions in the chat room. You all really at North Sound, as Monty and David and I and Elizabeth have worked with teams across the country, you all have been a tremendous model for just the activation in the chat. So encouraging you to add your curiosities, looking questions, asking for clarity, and building on others' ideas. You all have made a rich commitment and have demonstrated your value for really taking risks and testing new ideas together. And even as we share this virtual space, encourage you to continue to lean into that. And of course, meeting your needs. We're all sharing our offices these days with parents and pets and children. And if you need to step away, we just invite that you perhaps turn off your video, in that case, letting us know that you've needed to take a moment and turning your video back on when you return. A couple of other sort of housekeeping that will help strengthen your experience perhaps today is in the top right-hand corner from your desktop. You can control the speaker view or the view on your screen. Encouraging that as we have the panel and sort of keynote pieces, if you will, you may enjoy that most in speaker view. And as you jump into your breakout rooms, you'll have the option to be able to do the collective view, sort of a la Brady Bunch style. So encourage you to toggle between those and being, again, sort of present in the space together today. And lastly, to help Tiffany help us, for those of you who have dialed in on your phone, in addition to using your desktop or tablet perhaps, if you wouldn't mind doing a direct message to her, so you can either chat to everyone or you can select on the drop down. Tiffany will be able to then join your telephone number if you'll offer the last 4 digits with your name. As you move into breakout rooms, you'll be able to travel whole into those spaces together today. So appreciate that. Next slide, please. As we really walk into sort of the core of our content and time together and learning and sharing and exchanging, we'd like to ground ourselves in a reflection. And I'd like, if you would, David, to invite my colleague to read the reflection or the poem by Maya Angelou aloud.
Thank you, Stacy. So, as Stacy indicated, a selection here, A Brave and Startling Truth by Maya Angelou. We, this people, on this wayward, floating body, created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely without sanctimonious piety and without crippling fear.
Thanks, David. It's one of my favorites of the poet Maya Angelou. And I'd like to take just a moment to invite folks to offer into the chat what stood out for them. Was it a word? Was it a phrase? Or what feeling or thought might the poem have evoked for you? I know as I listened and as we offer this poem to share with you all, the phrase power to fashion really stood out for me, and power as we share power, as we build power, and the word fashion, that ability to create together. really stood out. Love seeing what's coming up in the chat, living freely without crippling fear. I can imagine that coming up, sort of our discussion around fear in this moment, being a piece that we lift up and talk about over the course of the day. We, this people, equaling humanity, again, in its wholeness. The dual meaning of the word climate, David, and interpersonal and environmental, those environments that we set. Wishing there was a space for those who don't identify as a man or a woman. I appreciate that. As we look at the art and create art, how might we be attentive to and inclusive in our language? Well, welcome you all to continue to add your thoughts and lift up your thoughts there. And if we might hit the next slide together. As we think about our time together in this space today, I always find it a bit useful to look back as we're looking forward. There have been many points on the timeline for your all's work together and opportunities to learn together, the work and leadership with Alicia and Greg and the project managers, with the individual partners, again, your work with one another, and just lifting up really three of the building blocks for coming to our time together today in the sessions of healing and hope, where we had the opportunity to invite John Powell to your all's table and to enjoy conversation with him, draw on his wisdom and conversation with Liz. As we joined others' table in the Dialogue for Action with the National Civic League, Imagine Fox Cities, and others. And as David hosted the conversation for the power of story, as we again look both inward at our individual growing edges, as David would offer, and our collective growing edge for the way that we talk about stock and concealed stories on our equity journey. And then the link that's available remain a series of other resources and items to build upon the thinking, items to be able to share with teams and become opportunities for discussion. Next slide, please. Just a quick stop to really acknowledge the growing and strengthening network that is the North Sound ACH, and with all of you as partners in that space, and as you all continue to build and enrich connections, so too you're being intentional about how you add and those connections across the nation, and have the opportunity to learn from other change makers in communities from Texas to North Carolina with the National Civic League. Many of you had the opportunity to be in breakout rooms and dialogue. Our friends from the Midwest at Imagine Fox Cities in Wisconsin, and tapping into a number of the other assets from the WIN network to the weaving community. Next slide, please. As we sort of offer up, if you will, the themes of what we've continued to hear in our dialogue sessions and key stakeholder interviews and other work across the North Sound, our sort of center or anchoring goals for our time together today and tomorrow will be that of connection. Again, even while virtual, how we share and exchange ideas, opportunities for some speed dating in a moment, opportunities to be in breakout session and in panel discussion with folks, continuing to explore and learn together and get real concrete as well in our thinking about how we're moving into action and how we may continue to grow that work together. And next slide. So the central arc of the day today for day one, we'll be following the path of these questions. Where are we now? What are we learning? And where are we heading? And with that, would love to invite Monty, you to join me in this space and to begin our first panel.
Thanks, Stacy, and thanks, Liz and David, for helping to kick us off. I'm Monty, also with the Community Initiative team, and really honored to join you all and help facilitate this panel to lift up some local voices around what are we experiencing, what does now feel and look like. And I think has been said many times, this is really a unique moment. It's a moment of community and connection, and it's also an incredibly disruptive moment of uncertainty. And so we wanted to hear a little bit from some of your peers that and some different perspectives around how we're experiencing that and what that might mean. And as I think many of us has been expressed on some previous calls and interactions with North Sound, that we're kind of holding on to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of contradictions at the same time. And so the purpose of this is just to kind of lift up those voices. And as Stacy had suggested, so thankfully we have Cedric Johnson from Unity Care Northwest and Rick Levine from Skagit Pediatrics and Linda McCarthy from Mount Baker Planned Parenthood. Unfortunately, we were going to have Marilyn Scott from Upper Skagit Indian Tribe, and she has had a family emergency, and she's not able to join us for this segment. So hopefully we'll be able to catch up with Marilyn and hear her ideas later. But we have three of our kind of peer leaders here, and we're going to keep all of these pretty informal, but again, encourage you all to chat in ideas, affirm ideas that you hear from your peers, and be thinking about how you might process a couple of these questions, because we'll have a little time on the other side of hearing from three peer leaders from you. So I think I saw Cedric and I think I saw Linda as I was kind of going through the Zoom, and I'm gonna ask each one of them to just start with just the first question, which is kind of briefly introduce yourself, how you are connected to the North Sound, the different kind of threads that kind of connect you to the North Sound ACH. And then we'll kind of move into a couple of other questions. But maybe I could start with Cedric and then Rick and then Linda. So if you could just take a couple minutes and introduce yourselves and how you're connected to the ACH and anything else you'd like to share about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Monty. Thanks, Liz, and to the ACH. So I'm Cedric Johnson. I work at Unity Care Northwest, so we're up in Whatcom County, and I grew up here in Whatcom County in Bellingham. My folks are still here, and I had a little dalliance in Eastern Washington, and moved back here and had an after-school job at Unity Care, and slowly but surely moved up and have found the work at a community health center to be a great marriage of my dual passions for science and social justice.
And Cedric, do you mind, are there any specific ways, kind of how you're connected to ACH that you would want to add to that?
Sure, yes. So a big part of my work here is in sort of coordinating our ACH activities and working towards alignment with our ACH commitments and some of our other external commitments and internal commitments. So trying to find a way to really implement and test programs that meet the requirements, but also are really in the spirit that I understand the ACH to be trying to work towards.
Great, thank you. How about you, Rick? Would you mind kind of introducing yourself and your connection with ACH?
You bet. My name's Rick Levine. I'm a pediatrician at Skagit Pediatrics in Mount Vernon. I've been at Skagit Pediatrics for about 25 years. We're a medium-sized independent pediatric practice, about 10 providers, staff of about 40 people. We've been a part of the North Sound ACH since early on, and I guess my role in the practice is currently I'm the medical director, and with that role, I've sort of trying to incorporate most of the things I'm learning at North Sound ACH into sort of our practice transformation. guess that's the best description. And I guess my place on the panel is I've had the opportunity to kind of navigate our practice through the last 6 months of the COVID crisis.
Great. Thanks for being here, Rick and Linda.
Hi there, good morning. I am very passionate advocate for reproductive health care and healthcare access in general. I'm a founding member of the Whatcom Alliance for Health Advancement and also the North Sound Accountable Community of Health Board, which I found to be a wonderful experience getting to know people from the region. I was an early skeptic of the regional ACH model and was frustrated when that was put together because of the local focus that I thought was lost. But I've come to appreciate the value of the regional structure, the networking, the learnings from each other. I've enjoyed the tribal engagement, especially the equity and targeted universalism work that we have done with John Powell. I've been impressed by the care coordination, collaboration, and opportunity for population health improvement. And Moppinger Planned Parenthood, which I'm the CEO of, we have had many opportunities through the North Sound to grow and think differently, and to integrate behavioral health is a big one for us, and to learn how to address the social determinants of health. And so I have, from an early skeptic, I'm a full believer now in the model and have really embraced all the work that we're doing and proud to be part of this. So thank you.
Thanks, Linda. So a convert here. So maybe we'll just go in this order, and just so everybody knows, we simply, before this session a couple days ago, so not very long ago, invited Cedric and Rick and Linda to just be thinking about a story or experience that really stands out for them, that kind of illustrates kind of how they're feeling about now, personally or professionally. So we left it pretty wide open, and I just wanted to let all of you know that we have plenty of time. I know we gave some time restrictions, but we don't feel like you have to hurry through your story. We just want to hear your thoughts. And so, Cedric, if you don't mind, I'll maybe start with you and kind of hear what's coming to mind for you on that front.
Sure, thank you. I think for me, the story of the pandemic, the COVID moment, is the story of how racism and anti-Blackness is the continual drumbeat, to every moment in American life. I early in the pandemic, back in March, there's not a lot to do. Things were closed down quite appropriately. And so I was, spending a lot of time walking around my neighborhood. I've lived in the same place for 6 years and grew up in Bellingham, and, know my neighborhood well, but, had a lot of time on my hands. So I was doing these evening strolls and morning strolls and, midday strolls. And I remember one day, actually was wearing a gray hoodie, my Mount Baker Planned Parenthood 50th anniversary hoodie. I just had this moment of like, oh God, here I am. I'm a Black guy walking through this neighborhood. I don't really normally walk these streets. I just had this anxiety that bubbled up. That was both specific and non-specific. I don't know, about what are the neighbors going to think? What are they going to do? And then, put that aside. Oh, come on, this is Bellingham. It's so wonderful here, blah, blah, blah. And where does that come from? Of course, I know where it comes from. So I, kind of put that out of my mind. And then, of course, the Ahmaud Arbery footage was widely circulated. I sort of avoided it, but it was, pushed to me, especially by many white friends of mine. Have you seen this? What do you think about this? How are you doing? And then, we had a wonderful protest and rally here in Bellingham in June. It was a beautiful sunny day. It's not always sunny in June in the North Sound, as everybody knows. So a early June outdoor rally is a risk. And was really jazzed and excited about it. And then heard that the Proud Boys or the Three Percenters were going to be there, and I ended up never seeing them. But then the next weekend, saw an alert on the Nextdoor app, which said, that the Proud Boys were patrolling my neighborhood and had been spotted. And so for me, it's been that even the moments of private, peaceful escape, contemplation, solitude during this global pandemic are tinged with these fears, which I then realized, okay, that's Georgia. Maybe it's worse there than it is here. That moments of pain around the murders of people like Breonna Taylor, then we come together as a community, but there's a fear that there will be white supremacist backlash there, and then sure enough, I'm alerted that they're here, they're in the neighborhood. I don't know what they were doing, intimidating people, and I'll tell you, it worked. I was intimidated. I skipped my evening walk that evening. So,
Cedric, thanks for kicking us off and being so transparent with your inner experience and sharing that with us. And would love again to keep coming back. We'll get some of the other panelist stories in there, and sorry that you're having to live with so much anxiety, and encourage others to continue to chat in ideas and questions, and maybe we'll get the other three voices in. Rick, perhaps you could share a little bit around a story that is sticking with you or it speaks to now.
Well, I don't know that I have a great single story or sort of a aha moment to share, but and less personal, say, than Cedric's. Maybe just a little bit of some of the lessons learned from our organization's journey. Maybe a little bit as a clinician, and then maybe a little bit personal, if that's okay. So, as you can imagine, as an organization, this past 6 months has been a little bit of a roller coaster. My family will tell you I don't do well on roller coasters. I get pretty nauseous, and I'm sort of more of a Pirates of the Caribbean kind of guy. But starting in March and for the past several months, we've had to make some decisions as an organization where you really could only guess what the next day would bring. So sometimes it felt like we were changing our plans and our minds about hourly. We've dealt with stresses and fears of the virus, fears of are we going to have to lay off staff? Fears are we going to have to close the clinic? Fears of making wrong choices and wrong decisions. So we set out some goals. We said we want to keep our clinic a safe place to provide care. We want to keep access available for our patients. We want to keep our staff intact and stay financially viable. And we learned a few things, and that's what I was hoping maybe I could share. We learned that even though some of these decisions and choices and changes are scary and often based on not nearly enough information, that we could survive them. I kind of laugh at the last North Sound partner gathering. We learned this term that I just love called failing forward. And out of necessity, that's sort of what we've been doing for the past several months, is failing forward. I'll give you an example there. Our foray into telemedicine. This is a little bit of a story and kind of a painful one, but I'll shorten it for you guys. In hopes of maintaining access for our patients and having absolutely no experience with telemedicine, we jumped right on in. And we found a great platform. We built some really cool EMR templates, and we taught our staff and all the providers all this great stuff that we had learned. And we got started, and it just flopped. It totally flopped. And it turned out that internet connectivity with our patients on the platform we had chosen was just terrible. So we worked, and we had worked so hard, and but we could have never planned for that. So, but it just didn't work. And so we tried fixing it. We tried this idea. We tried that idea. We spent hours learning about connectivity. I learned more about coaxial cables and Wi-Fi, and fascinating, yes, but not anything I had any background and any training in medical school on. So we ended up picking another platform, and it actually worked. And we learned that most of our ideas were really pretty good, and we moved forward, and we moved forward, and then we found more problems, and we failed, and then we failed forward some more, and we made it work. And actually, we're still working on it. It's working pretty well, but there's still lots of little tweaks, and I just love that whole concept of failing forward. I think as an organization that we're learning more how to do that and take some chances. And we learned about communication and relationships and how important they are. We met so many times as a staff in those first few months. I got to know my staff very well. Truthfully, before COVID, I had a hard time remembering some of my receptionist names, honestly. And now here we are high-fiving, air high-fiving, over just the smallest victories. And I learned what amazing people I work with: smart, resilient, committed, really good-hearted. And we learned how to network outside of our organization. So many people outside our group are out there to help, and people we met through the Sound ACH, great folks at the Public Health Department and Spark, and folks from Seattle Children's. It's like this community working together, trying to do the right thing. So that's what I learned as an organization, as a clinician. As many of you have seen, I've seen how fragile our social fabric has become. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear, and it's led to anxiety. It's led to exhaustion. I think so many people are sort of at wit's end. And but I've also seen really good stuff. I've seen folks jump in, volunteer wherever they can. I've learned a little bit about masks, as we all have. They're very important, but they're hard. They keep us safe. They keep us safe from the virus, but it's hard to read people when they're wearing a mask. It's hard to connect. We found, in fact, that telemedicine is actually a better way to visit with some people sometimes, just because you can see them. I've seen, even with babies, they come in for their well checkup, and they smile at you, and they wait for you to smile back, and then you don't because you're wearing a mask. And so they do it a few times, they smile at you a few times, and then they just kind of move on. And so it's a little less fun. The well checkups have been a little less fun. Personally, this has been a busy time. I haven't had a lot of time to think about it. I've had to readjust. I've readjust my own approach to uncertainty and fear. It's kind of a new feeling. I've been pretty lucky. I don't have too much fear in my life, but COVID has definitely created some new little monsters under the bed for me to wrestle with. And so that's been a change for me. Black Lives Matters, the movement comes along and teaches me that, yeah, how exactly lucky I have been. And that so many people around me are living in a very different place than I've lived. So I guess I'm still working on that. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Rick. Appreciate you putting yourself out there. And we'll loop back. So, Linda, what about you?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think if you've ever heard the term drinking from a fire hose, that about sums up 2020 so far for Mount Baker Planned Parenthood. And I suspect we're not alone. Unlike the Lummi Nation, who I applaud for having been preparing for the pandemic back in February, like most, we were caught off guard, although the virus was lurking in plain sight. I can't even recall the very moment when we realized this was a very big deal, but but I think it was when the nursing home down the street from our big health center had their first death, and that sort of forced us to spring into action. And then early on, the governor mandated that Planned Parenthood or reproductive health providers were essential community providers and were to keep our full services available because of the pregnancy risk at COVID, which really made us start to scramble. And I think what we've heard is that our staff were very resilient and came together. The providers came up with a plan to scale back our in-clinic services and only bring people in that we had to. And then we rearranged our waiting rooms to make social distancing, closed every other exam room to make room to move patients around, provided masks to patients, insisted that they be worn, and then screened everybody as everybody's doing temperatures and symptoms before they're admitted. And then, as Rick was just saying, we were able to get our telemedicine, something that's been on our work list for 2 years, up and going in 8 days. So never let a good crisis go to waste. We got that operational. And then we layered on a lot of other mechanisms to help our patients access care because a lot of them don't have Wi-Fi. So we made some Wi-Fi free zones in our parking lots where patients could pull their car up there. And if somebody wasn't able to come in because of a symptom, we could get their supplies to them by no touch by putting them on the hood of their car. So trying to find a creative way every time we ran into a roadblock to figure out a way to take care of them. And of course, we turned to the PPE scramble like everybody was, and suddenly things were hard to get and they are very expensive. But we were very touched by the many people in our community who donated cloth face coverings and face shields and hand sanitizers from the distilleries, and then bought our staff lunch and treats to thank them for being on the front line. So it was really nice for our staff to see that while they were in the trenches, they weren't alone. And, but I think we can't underestimate the fact that managing COVID-19 was unlike anything we've ever experienced, and that we had all these safety measures in place. We were really unprepared for the very real unprecedented fear. And I would actually call it terror that gripped our staff. And I think Rick just touched on that. And I was struggling to understand how to manage this. So I turned to a friend of mine who's a clinical psychologist in Seattle, and I was trying to get some advice from her, figuring out how to describe the situation that I was feeling and seeing in our staff, when I ran across a paragraph about soldiers in combat in a book I was reading, a novel, and it struck me that their description was really what I was seeing. And here's what that description said. And it says that infantry puts up with a world of shit. They live in holes in the ground, cold, wet, muddy, hungry with incoming mortars and artillery and rockets, bombs and gas, air assaults and missiles, and they have nothing ahead of them except barbed wire and machine gun nest. But you know what they hate most of all? And the answer is snipers. Random death out of nowhere, anytime, any place. No notice, no warning, every minute of every day, no relief. The stress becomes unbearable. And it hit me at that moment that that is what COVID-19 was and how our staff were experiencing it. So that was the description that I shared with my psychologist friend when I was trying to describe how our folks were feeling. And then shortly after I finished reading that book, I read The Great Influenza by John Barry, which profiled the 1917 and 1918 influenza that killed 50 to 100 million people worldwide. And I don't normally read the afterwards, but for some reason I did in this book. And I was really struck again by the final 4 pages in the afterword that started with this sentence. There was terror afoot in 1918, real terror. It continued with the randomness of death brought that terror home. But as horrific as the disease itself was, public health officials and the media helped create that terror, not by exaggerating the disease, but by minimizing it, by trying to reassure. If there's a single dominant lesson from 1918, it's that governments need to tell the truth in a crisis. You don't manage the truth, you tell the truth. So the final lesson of 1918, a simple one, most difficult to execute, is that those who occupy positions of authority must lessen the panic that can alienate all within a society. Society cannot function if it is every man for himself. By definition, civilization cannot survive that. Those in authority must retain the public's trust. And he ends the book with this quote from Lincoln, who he believes said it best. A leader must make whatever horror exists concrete, and only then will people be able to break it apart. I share these thoughts with you because we're in a dangerous place in our society where our leaders have not followed this recipe for success and instead have minimized COVID-19. All of us here today, everyone on this call, we're all leaders in our respective work, and it's our job to recognize the very real challenges our staff face and to build the trust with them in the communities we serve in partnership with the North Sound ACH so we can continue to provide care and keep our doors open to serve those most in need. I applaud the North Sound ACH for doing their part by releasing funds earlier than normal to help their contracted agencies manage through the crisis moments and for keeping in contact with us all to see if there's any way to help. To those of us who are on the front lines, it has meant a lot to hear kind words of support and to know that others appreciate our efforts to provide care in this challenging time. My message to our team and to you is to remember this is a marathon, not a sprint. We know our way forward, and we as leaders need to really practice the simple steps and reinforce with our folks that this virus is real, has a mind of its own, and our best way forward is simply what we already know. Wear a mask, wash your hands, stay home if you're sick, and practice social distancing. We're in this together, and we'll get through it together. And I want to thank again the North Sound ACH for their support during this incredible time.
Thanks, Linda. I see in the chat folks are clarifying the couple books that you talked about, The Great Influence, I believe, by John Barry. And Jackie says, be courageous and speak truth. That's what community needs and wants, is for us. I don't know if that's both us and for the US, to be honest with them. Thank you for sharing, Linda. It's interesting to me that in different ways, we, each of you, in really authentic and vulnerable ways, talked about the fear that your organizations those closest with you are experiencing, this fear that comes with uncertainty and a lot of other reasons. And I'm, again, just open it up to three of you as well as folks in the chat to maybe delve a little bit further into what do we do knowing that we still have lots of uncertainty, that we're still kind of wrestling with fear. What are you doing personally, and or what are you as leaders within your respective teams trying to do to help folks kind of grapple and use this fear or navigate fear?
I can maybe just reemphasize what Linda said. Is I think and folks in the chat room have talked about, is I think just transparency with our staff. I think people just want information and telling the truth, telling what you know and what you don't know. I think it's scary sometimes to tell people I just don't know. I don't know what we're going to do for that. Here's what we're working on. And I think that's gone a long way in my organization of just meeting frequently, trying to be as upfront with what we can do and what we just don't know yet. And like Diane just wrote in there, acknowledging that this is really scary, and that their worries are justified. And here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing our best to mitigate the risk, because you can't mitigate it all, but you can mitigate a lot of it if you do the right things. And just understanding that's not a very comfortable feeling for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right. And I think, to pick up on what Rick said and something Linda said or read from the quote about we know the way forward. And we don't always know the exact way, but I think when we're clear with ourselves about, our values and then also clear with our staff, with our friends, with our community, and then we can also be transparent about when we don't know and when we've failed, but how do we fail forward? Well, gosh, we didn't have all the information, or we couldn't have anticipated some of those barriers, but now we can, regroup based on what we've learned and what our values are. And so if we've learned that something we did violated those values, but we know what our values are, then, and we're being honest with ourselves and with our staff, with our friends, with our, you know, politicians, with our Twitter feeds, then that's how we can recover. Slowly at times, quickly at times, piece by piece.
Thanks for that, Cedric. I don't know if she's on the call, but I had the chance to speak with Debbie Jones, tribal liaison with SAMH. And she said something yesterday that really stuck out for me. And I hope she doesn't mind if I'm sharing this. But, you know, I was asking her about where she sees ACH heading. And she said, I'm not exactly sure, but I feel like we're really on the right path. And I just so appreciated her. She had a lot of other great ideas that it reminds me, Cedric, of what you're saying. We are honoring our values in the way that we're moving forward in this path, even though we don't entirely know what that looks like yet. And that's powerful. Linda, do you have any additional thoughts around how we either personally, as you were talking to your friend in Seattle, or collectively really harness and manage our fear? You know, back to the Maya Angelou problem. How do we may not be living in a place where fear isn't crippling, but we're trying to move to that space?
I think it's really important for people to listen to their staff and listen to people when they talk, because fear is real, and too often we try to discount it because we don't know how to deal with it. And I don't have a lot of answers on how to deal with it, but I could hear it in Rick's voice, and I know I hear it in mine. I have personally have never felt the intensity that I felt from mid-March through August. I mean, it was a blur, but it was so intense because the focus on making sure you get the PPE, making sure you listen to your staff, making sure you're trying to make sure you have everything in place. And we're a small team, so we were counting on each other at the same time, getting people out to work remotely. It was really hard. And I was touched by Rick's voice when he was sort of breaking up a little bit and talking about the fear, which he had no idea what I was going to say. I was touched because I felt it. And I don't think we have sat back. I know I really haven't sat back and let myself really breathe on my own. I've been so focused on every single minute of every day. What do I have to do next? That it can cripple you or it can overwhelm you. So we just have to find a way to breathe and relax and move on to the next thing, and to remember that we're in this together. That's really important.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I hear this in some of your other earlier conversation. Just this is a reminder of our interdependence. You know, as a country and certainly as a community, as we live close to each other. I wanted to just clarify one thing. I had mentioned that Debbie Jones is a tribal liaison. She's actually the tribal health director. So just wanted to clarify that, and sorry for getting that wrong, Debbie. You know, Liz has shared a couple of times in different meetings that this is potentially a real watershed moment for our country, but for the North Sound, meaning that this could be a real moment of change, you know, depending on what we do with the now. And I'm wondering, you know, for our three panelists, and of course anybody in the chat, what would make this a watershed moment in the sense that would actually really tip us to fully living into and realizing the values that already have been expressed in the direction where we're heading with North Sound? So is this a watershed moment? How do we take advantage of this watershed moment? Cedric, Rick, Linda.
Well, this is Linda. I'm happy to go. I think it's actually 3 watershed moments, and or a trifecta of watershed moments. I think the fight, as Cedric leaned into for racial justice, is our country's in a moment of reckoning, and this is not going back. The Black Lives Matter movement is pushing us forward, and there's a lot of tension there, but tension does move you forward. And it also is shining light on so many of the health disparities that the community of colors have experienced over the years. And I think for the North Sound ACH to continue to drive its principles of targeted universalism to help right some of these wrongs is a really good coming together of the need and the methods and pathway and the desire and drive to do this. I think there's also another watershed moment for mental health services. Our country has, over the last 20 years, really scaled back mental health services, and we've seen people suffer needlessly. And this behavioral health integration that is going on now is something that we have to have the will to push forward, because for better or for worse, the fact that so many people are needing mental health services right now helps push it even further. But we can't lose sight of the fact that so many people have suffered and that there has not been parity with behavioral health and mental health. And then I think the third watershed moment for me right now is that democracy is being tested in America. And never before has so many Americans ignored a simple request from public health officials to wear a mask, a face covering in public, to protect their fellow Americans. Too many have shown that even in the face of a deadly and dangerous pandemic, it's too often about me instead of we. And we have to grapple with the selfishness as a nation. And so I see three watershed moments here. They kind of intersect or bump into each other. But there's a lot going on, and we can't lose sight of any of the three of them.
I think, in terms of, well, first of all, something Liz put in the chat, it's only a watershed moment if we change. And I just want to thank you, Liz, for saying that and for highlighting that. Otherwise, it's a disruption, or it's an exception, or it's I don't know what it is. I don't know what the word is. And I think one of the hard parts is that there is so much going on at the same time, so acutely, and everybody is, stretched so thin. And I think, some of the ways that we can capitalize on this, hold the positive changes that have already happened and push them further, is to in our organizations and at the ACH throughout the region, set specific goals and targets and hold those accountable. And, we talk about mental health parity, which, but let's talk about equity and anti-racism parity, as we are doing our our budgets and our annual planning, or maybe our longer term strategic planning in some of our organizations. And we have big ticket initiatives. Some of them might be related to our ACH commitments. So we gotta, get this or that up and running, or make sure we spend that disbursement on hiring this new, whatever it may be. And if we don't really continue to make access to our services and equitable outcomes and anti-racism part of the conversation and part of our work, it's just going to get swallowed up, because we've all got a lot of stuff to do and it's all really important. But as I said at the beginning, racism is part of all of that. So and it deepens all of it, and it's a cause and an effect of all of it. So we really have to not stop having the conversation, but we also can't just sit around and talk about it all the time. We have to really have some action items, set some goals, set some priorities, and we won't achieve all those goals. But that's better than just saying, oh, it's too hard, we don't know how to do any of it, which is in a really easy place and a really understandable place to end up. But we can't stay there. And something that that Rick and Linda both spoke to is how much we were able to accomplish at our organizations. And I was telling people in April, we did 2 years worth of work in 3 weeks. I'm not kidding. At Unity Care, we did things that should have taken a year of planning and at least a year of implementation in just days and weeks. So we're a capacious group. We can really do a lot, and we should be proud of that, but we shouldn't be too proud of ourselves. We shouldn't pat ourselves on the back. We can keep working, and we can, again, set some goals, some targets, some action items, and prioritize targeted universalism, racial justice, access to appropriate screening and reproductive services. We can put all of those things in our annual planning, and I encourage all of us.
See, lots of great chats going on. I might actually ask Stacy in a moment if she wanted to reflect on those or have some other folks voice those. But Rick, any last thoughts for you on this notion of?
Thanks. Both well said already. But I guess I think what I've seen, I think this pandemic, this crisis has clearly laid bare the difficulties with our social fabric. It's remarkable what we see families struggling with that shouldn't be happening. And I guess what I have seen, and I guess makes me a little hopeful, is that it's recognized, the whole question of behavioral health and finding ways, creative ways of involving behavioral health in the way we do things. I mean, it used to be like this, a little pat on the head when we talked about it with some folks but now when you talk to a MCO, I just had a conversation with folks at one of the MCOs yesterday, and first thing they want to talk about is how do we do better at integrated behavioral health? And I just kind of had to smile to myself, because that's been on the back burner for so long for so many people who seem to wield the dollars, that all of a sudden they want to sit down and figure out how do we deal with social determinants of health. And I guess that it is a little bit of a silver lining that it's gotten to be so bad that some people are actually starting to pay a little attention, that social determinants of health and behavioral health are super important on the medical side. So I think I guess I'm a little hopeful. I think it's going to take a while to change, because change takes a little bit of work, but I think the wheels are starting to turn. And so I'm a little hopeful. So I do think it's a little bit of a watershed moment.
Thanks, Rick. Stacey, there's so many great comments. I hope folks are following in the chat that do them justice. So I don't know if you want to lift any up.
I'd be happy to, and it is rich. And again, just appreciate everyone being in this space and contributing, sharing, and absorbing what's being offered. A couple of themes that were starting to stand out, and I'll borrow on Jackie's words, sort of the reminder that going back to legacy, we must acknowledge that we're not actually experiencing a moment, it's a movement, and that we're building on the work that's behind us. And I would bridge that perhaps to another sort of ongoing series of comments in the chat, which is, how do we really move forward in aligning our values, our budget, and the power shift, and acknowledging that, that this group is leaning into that space, and also noting that, that there's still personal growth and organizational growth for how do we do that? How do I leverage my role to do that work well? And then perhaps just the second theme that was starting to emerge, there's a terrific resource that looks like being shared, the NAP. It's the NAP ministry, also new to me. And I know in a few moments we're going to be talking about paradoxes, and one of the pieces that sort of comes up is, the paradox that we're all doing more. It's been named here, right? That, perhaps without the need to travel, et cetera, that we can spend more time and work with one another and sort of end up close. And so folks are uber busy. Cedric, what I think you just said, something that would have taken you a year took a few days, and balancing that with the real time, and space that often occurs with our in-between when we travel to meetings, or have more downtime to really reflect and to take care of ourselves. So there's a theme around what does that look like as well.
Thanks, Stace. I was thinking the question around what do we do with the now, the fear and the anxiety was answered in so many different ways there. And, to paraphrase Cedric again, that we need time to reflect, we need to tell the truth, we need to kind of attend to what we're feeling, and we need to act, we need to fail forward, we need to set goals, we need to take advantage if this is going to be a movement, a movement for a moment for a movement to really take hold. That's what we do. And in some ways, agency and creating space for folks to act is one of the best ways to kind of act our way out of crippling fear. I want to just again, thank Cedric, Rick, and Linda for just so powerfully, displaying what it means to be vulnerable, to be honest, which I think is really a strength of any network as we're building that. So just honor you all modeling that and just reminding us of the goodness that is here in this region that is there for us to tap into. And so thank you again, and thanks for all the great comments. And in a sense, we're going to just continue part of this conversation around what we're learning around paradox in a slightly different format. And I'm going to hand it back over to David for that.
Thank you, Monty, and thank you, everyone, particularly our panelists whose voices were lifted up in that last segment, but also the folks who are writing into the chat. Just an incredible amount of passion and power. I can't remember the last time, or if ever, I've been a part of a Zoom room meeting that felt so passionate, and obviously very clearly indicative of this moment and this time and so forth. And even though we had a number of great spoken voices and chatted voices, we're going to take a minute, as Monty said, to go a little bit deeper into this paradox and to give each and every one of you the opportunity in pairs to speak to the contradictions, if you will. Next slide, please. So I think by now, most of us have realized how incredibly and powerfully, there's been this dual reality to the moment in time we find ourselves in. And, the contradictions we find are, while we're finding more time with family and enjoying and appreciating that, we're also feeling isolated as families, or even as individuals, depending on the size of our families. On one hand, we're thinking about our future in deeper and more substantive ways. And on the other hand, we feel stuck in a moment to a significant degree, that we, to some degree, want to, escape from or work our way through. On one hand, there's a level of awareness and solidarity around equity for a substantial number of folks. Some of us may be struck by how many individuals are speaking out for equity through solidarity, but at the same time, there's an awareness of, not only gaps in the lack of a feeling of interconnectedness, but gaps in terms of the level of our experiences, in the world. Kind of harkening back to Dr. Levine's point earlier, with respect to the fact that, many of us are recognizing, wow, others are living very different realities than me. And so, here's an opportunity we want to provide you all. We're about to break you out into pairs, and you're going to have 2 rounds of paired dialogue with another individual. You're going to be assigned randomly. But we ask that you please do not leave your breakout room until the time expires. Make the most of this, take advantage of this opportunity. We'll have 2 rounds of sharing. So at the end of the first time period, you'll be automatically pushed into a second breakout session. And hopefully that second breakout session will be with a different person, but you are being assigned randomly. And so random is random. There may be a 1 in 1,000 chance that you might get reassigned to the very same person. And so Stacy's going to put the questions into the chat box while Tiffany assigns you into the breakouts. And the questions are, what are you learning in this moment? Is there a story that speaks to the contradictions you're experiencing? How are you experiencing these contradictions? Are there any contradictions you would add? Some of them, we just named a few just as examples. There's probably, an increased number of different contradictions that we're all living and experiencing in this moment. So again, please do not leave your assigned breakout rooms until you're kind of nudged into your second round of dialogue with a hopefully different person. We're going to move into a couple of panels as our PowerPoint comes in focus, where we're going to, as I said, talk about where we're heading. If you could advance this slide. And in this session, you're going to have a couple of panels that are going to answer this question: how are we advancing equity going forward as the ACH community, the North Sound ACH community? You're going to have about 20 minutes You're going to be placed into one of two panel group discussions, and you'll see in the chat the list of individuals who are going to be in each of the respective panel group discussions. And it's going to be an opportunity for you all to both listen and hopefully to make contributions to the conversation during that time period. Tiffany is going to randomly assign you to one of the panel discussions, again, for 20 minutes. And the questions the panelists will be responding to are, what are COVID-19 and the movement for Black lives and racial justice revealing about the role of the North Sound ACH? What is wanted and what is needed? The second question is, if North Sound ACH achieves its vision, what is the one thing you would be most excited to experience? What does this change look like in action? So the panelists are going to take a couple of minutes each to respond to those questions. And then we're going to bring you back. If we have time, we'll do a little bit of sharing and harvesting from your individual panel discussions. Or we may just roll into a sharing from Liz about what the folks in the ACH are gathering from you all about where we could see ourselves going.
Just wanted to say thank you to Jackie and Yuki and Kim for being here and for being willing to offer their voice, and wondering if we might take just a quick moment to have each of them speak their voice into the room, share which organization they're with so that folks can orient in the panel view here. And Jackie, would you mind starting?
Hi, good morning. I'm Jackie Julian. I'm with Communities of Color Coalition. And so I recognize some of your beautiful faces from just right the work and leaning in and when we were having social gatherings. In short, we are a grassroots community-led organization. We advocate for social justice and economic justice, healthcare, education. We support the greater North Puget Sound region. So I'm super happy to be here with you.
Thanks, Jackie. And Yuki, could you share briefly about you and your organization?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Yuki Yang. I'm with Ideal Option. Excuse me. We provide opioid use disorder treatment across the U.S. And for the North Sound here, we have 5 clinics. About 90% of our patients are Medicaid patients. And so we're very excited to be a new partner of the North Sound ACH. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Yuki. And Kim, would you lift up your voice and share with us?
Hi, I'm Kim Williams, and I currently serve as the Chief Executive for Providence Northwest, which is primarily Snohomish County. I'm a nurse by background, and I also have the privilege of serving as the board chair for the North Sound ACH. And I see many familiar faces from many different, many different parts of my life. So that's terrific. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you all. And was wondering if perhaps in the same order, just to balance some of the nuance of in and out with Zoom, if Jackie, you might start us off by sharing some of your thoughts around what COVID-19 and the movement for Black lives and racial justice is revealing about the role of the North Sound ACH, both what is wanted and what's needed.
Yeah, thank you. And if I pause, right, because it's heavy, so like just lean in. In answering that question, for me, a lot of things come up, right? Just as someone mentioned, right, being new. And so knowing that roles are constantly changing, we're getting, right, new maybe faces, like we still have our partners, but maybe new faces. And just thinking of like, where are we headed? For me, we have to acknowledge like our come from. And that's critical in this time of like COVID and Black Lives Matter movement, to know that, you know, where we've come from before moving forward. Also important to be able to identify like where we are individually. So when we think about what's needed, what's needed is that we center healing be at the center. above all things as we move forward. And what's critically important about being able to identify our own individual location is that there's no understanding without knowing where we've come from. Again, going back to this is a movement. This is forever shifting and altering. Like we are creating a new culture. And going back to truth, like that was super powerful, what was shared earlier. COVID and ACH, what is needed and wanted is transparency. For the BIPOC community, especially when we think about the history again, like we have to know like the come from. And the reason why I'm probably going to keep going back to that is because, as I mentioned, like we work with community, those that are most impacted, most marginalized, most vulnerable. And what's being asked is from a place of curiosity, because I get and I understand like folks, right? As we mentioned, like they're aware of things that they're just finding out, right? They're fresh on the scene. How are we creating space, one, to acknowledge that that's where they are, but also like for the individuals to be honest with themselves. Because how can you know how to help if you don't understand like what's needed? And so protections moving forward as we engage in these conversations. And that's why I think it's important for us to be able to identify where are we in this journey. But then also another thing to consider is as an organization, where is your organization? What is some work that may be needed and how can ACH support? So as we work with COVID, we know that these issues and our organization, again, is a little bit different. Like that's not our internal issue, but having worked in the system and knowing what's the problem, that I could be aware of the problem and the issue, but without supports in the organization to acknowledge and make change, then like my efforts, right, it will just exhaust me. And so I think in short, like it's a call to action and it's an individual journey, right? We have to ask ourselves, what is our individual commitment to this? Being mindful too that we have to give ourselves grace. We all have families. We have individual needs. We all have, well, we don't all, right? But if it's not us, we know of somebody that may be directly close to us that have health considerations and concerns. And so I think it's interesting because I think in earlier sessions, as you know, we talk about legacy and the work of ACH, that it's really referred back to themselves as an octopus. And like it's a theme in their office if you've ever been there. So it's kind of like, and I'm going to share this with Nicole and Liz, that, you know, being mindful of what we say and put out in the universe, because now more so than ever, like, right, they have these little pods, or what an octopus is called when they don't know they travel together, but that's what's happening. We're having to do all these things in juggle. So what's needed and wanted is that we center like the needs around the Black community. Being mindful, again, history, that we know that even in COVID, even in this crisis, we know who's most at risk. We know who's most vulnerable. We know the disproportionality. It's fact that women of color, right, have the highest fertility rate in pregnancy. We know that young and Black girls are still most at risk for being abused. These things are factual. So what's needed is that like we center healing, not only around Black lives, but our own, because we are creating a new culture. But in order to do that, we must be honest with ourselves and identify our location to move forward.
Thank you for those opening thoughts, Jackie. And Yuki, would like to invite you to layer on with your lens.
Sure. So yeah, building on to what Jackie said, I really approached the response to this question as North Sound ACH as a leadership organization, and to be able to provide all the partners the space, the safe space to the theme of what we're about for our time together, the connection, the time to connect with one another in a way that is open and honest and transparent. And then to explore these really tough questions. And as Jackie said, what our values are around those, these inequities and the issues that are coming up right now. And then finally, it's the action piece. It's coming together collectively and doing something about it, to be an advocate, whether it be access to care or addressing some of the other inequalities that exist in the populations that we serve. It's being in action, it's executing. And I think that this organization and everyone coming together collectively, we obviously have more power and the support of one another to really make this a movement, as we've been talking about today, not just a moment, but a movement. And I can appreciate what Linda said earlier about, you know, at first it's like moving towards an ACH model, a regional ACH model. Can that really work? And I really do believe that with the leadership that we have in this group, in this organization, that we can actually come together as a region and make positive change for all the reasons that Jackie said, as well as what we've heard today. So in terms of what's wanted and needed, I think it's continuing to not just have the conversations and talking, you know, we have a lot of meetings and we talk about things, but it's actually to do something and to be in action and to take action. And there are a lot of actions that we can all identify. So it's collectively deciding what are the most important things we want to do and respond to them, as opposed to sticking with the roadmap and the strategic plan that was created or could be created a year ago. We need to respond to the things that are happening today.
Yeah, thanks, Yuki. And Kim, would you add your voice to that? And you're on mute, if you would, please.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So, you know, as I think about this question, I can think about it as a healthcare administrator, but really, I think about it as a nurse. And when I think about COVID-19 and racial justice and where we are today, I am seeing unnecessary death related to both of these, that I believe this group and convenings like this and the fact that the ACH is facilitating the collaboration, that we can come together and make a difference in our 5 counties. And certainly, you know, when the ACH formed, it was before a lot of the work that is really targeted at Medicaid. And the people that gathered really wanted to change social determinants. And I don't think we were broad enough thinking as far as looking at equity and racial justice. And I'm thrilled to see that added. And so as I think about what do we want and need, or what do I want and need, I need partners across the areas that I serve to help us not be blind to the things that we are probably blind to. I need collaboration. I need folks to help us internally as a very large employer. I know that the impact of our caregivers in their worlds can help change Snohomish County. So I think the ACH is just right now, the leadership that's there is stellar, and that the convening, the collaborating, the bringing groups like this together so we can learn from one another is a place that is unique in our 5 counties. And I think we're I think we're blessed to be able to think about how do we move this work forward in a new, a different way.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've got just a couple of minutes left together in this breakout. So I'm wondering, in sort of 30 to 45 seconds or so, and Kim, perhaps with your voice starting here and working back across our panel, If the North Sound ACH achieves its vision, what's one thing that you would be most excited to experience? Or what does that change look like in action?
Well, I don't know one thing. It is really improvement in health equity, and that's from a nurse, right? I want to see everyone's health outcomes improve, and I'd love it if none of you ever needed to come into the hospital to receive care, because we are doing such a great job in the North Sound. So,
Thank you for that. Yuki.
Yep, I would love it if we could act quickly, just as we did, and we were responsive to COVID. Many of our companies and collectively, we turned on a dime. I would love to see that continue, and that we have data and be open and learn, but not get bogged down and not be in action.
Thank you for that. And Jackie.
Yeah, just to add on, if ACH achieves its vision, again, going back to like we're creating a new culture, right? So that's what I'm most excited. New ways of being, and centering our effort and energy in healing. Going back to Cedric had mentioned earlier about leaning in. So if we achieve our vision, what that looks like is supporting the different agencies and individuals with where they're at with creating a comprehensive plan, right? So we're not inflicting harm in this process, because I don't know that we all have a firm understanding of our come from, and that's harmful for our BIPOC community. Lastly, I will just end by saying, like, we're not deactivating a bomb. We're healing a wound. So bedside manner matters. Healing begins with communication. So I'm grateful that we're leaning in and we're having this conversation.
So I'll just pick up where David left off, and we have 3 panelists. So Holly Martinson from Lydia's Place, Alex Perez from the Northwest Agricultural Business Center, and Liz are the 3 voices that are going to kind of answer those questions that David lifted up. And again, we can continue to chat. I think we may have a little bit closer to 15 minutes, just as a heads up. So without further ado, I'm wondering, Holly, if you might be willing to jump in and share a little bit around who you are, your organization, and perhaps that very first question that David asked around what do you really see as HCA's unique role in really advancing equitable well-being?
Sure. Thanks, Monty. Yeah, my name is Holly Martinson, and I'm a mental health clinician at Lydia Place. We provide housing case management, counseling, parenting support to families who are facing homelessness. And so kind of to answer the first question, particularly for Black lives and racial justice, I've seen the ACH provide support for those voices who are often suppressed or overlooked or discounted in our communities, which are more often than not the voices of people of color. Just personally, I reached out to the ACH a few months ago, asking if there was a space for people of color in the community, professionals in the community, for us to kind of talk about the relevant issues. And there wasn't something like that. And so the ACH said, let's do it, let's start this. And so they provided leadership from the ACH to step alongside me to start this group. And things like just offering the Zoom platform, scheduling, sending out emails to partners about the group. And I found that this support has continued over these past few months. So I feel like the ACH is really listening to the needs of people of color in the community when we express them, and really trusting that we know what we need, that we don't need to be told what we need because we are the experts on us. And I've seen them really honor that sentiment. And also just not saying that they're gonna do something, but actually following through with it in a meaningful way, like I said, with that ongoing support. So I really think that an important role that the ACH can take is to continue to support these endeavors, and really continue to demonstrate a willingness to listen to the community members, particularly those of color, which I think is really critically important right now, particularly in this movement.
Thank you, Holly, for kicking us off.
Yeah.
listening and letting the community lead, and particularly leaders of color in that process. And wondering if I could pass it over to you, Alex, to kind of share your thoughts around the ACH and its unique role that you're seeing.
Unmute myself. Hello to everyone. Yes, my name is Alex Perez, and I work at Northwest Agricultural Business Center, a nonprofit. And I started a bilingual business development program supporting farmers and other related businesses. And going into the focus of what the North Sound ACH is doing, honestly, I did not have too much knowledge of what they were doing. I met Vanessa, who happens to be one of the staff members there, through another community effort, LAC, Latino Advisory Committee meetings, where we did another group called the Latino COVID Prevention Team. And the focus there was to find ways to provide possible solutions to the existing barriers and problems that we're facing here in the community, mainly because we have a lot of people that are actually unaware of certain things and not knowing how dangerous the situation is. And I believe that it's the same mentality that we need to keep, is as far as having an open mindset that there are existing processes and procedures that are not working, and we need to really start listening more, kind of what Holly was mentioning, because I'm a strong believer that you can't really offer a solution to a problem you don't really understand. And many people are really good and fast at providing suggestions or critique or judgment. But honestly, there's very few people that are taking the time to really understand how we can really move on with an actual action plan. Because we really need actions. We don't really need words, because I personally see this as a trend that occurred during these times, but this has been happening for a long time. And to me, it's a little bit disrespectful to some people to pretend that now they want to do something about it. So that kind of says that we've been ignoring this for a long time. So now we can actually focus on possible ways of taking action and getting things done in a meaningful way, that we feel that we're doing work in a meaningful process where we're treating people with dignity and respect. Because many people are going to be offended or feel uncomfortable to change. And if we really continue to ignore these differences or personal opinions or political beliefs, then we really can't move on forward if we don't really have open spaces. So I think what the ACH is doing is amazing, because they're actually listening and taking notes on what is needed and actually following through with actions. Because we do have a lot of people that have a good intention, but many times they only say things and they really don't take actions. So I believe that if these efforts continue, a lot of things are going to be happening in a way that it's going to be meaningful and have a lot of impact with folks that maybe didn't know that there was new ways or actually better ways to understand what really is going on. Because we can't really relate to people if we never lived certain situations or been part of destructive ways from some people.
Thank you for that, Alex. And Liz, you clearly think a lot about what is and I think you're going to share a little bit more towards the end, but just wanted to bring your voice in to maybe what you're hearing and kind of what's kind of your thoughts on kind of what the role of ACH is, particularly given this unique moment in time. If you're with us, Liz, I think you are.
Yep, I'm here. Sorry. I think back if there's anybody in this group that was there, in the fall of 2017, we brought a speaker up to one of our very first partner convenings to talk about the relationship between health equity and racism. And we had, 100 people in a room down in Anacortes, and the level of enthusiasm on one side and discomfort on the other side of trying to talk about race in relation to the work that we were doing. For me and our team, it was it just painted for us, like if we're really on this journey, like how much do we need to do grounding in order to actually talk about these issues. And I think the last, what feels like years, the last 3 months, with COVID and the killings, and I think for us, really, I'm going to couple a third thing, which is the field and farm workers and the response or lack thereof around COVID. The ACH is trying to figure out how do we build in targeted universalism even into something like COVID testing. How do we build in targeted universalism into how we invest the dollars that we have some flexibility around? And it does mean, both this notion of listening for voices, listening for input, but then we have to invest where those voices need investment. And, so many of those community organizations are volunteer run, volunteer led. And we want to just like flip the paradigm to invest where that needs strengthening so that that becomes the next cadre of leaders, as opposed to that's where we go for community engagement. We want those partners kind of alongside us. And so the ACH has really been trying to figure out how do we play a role in raising up voices, which might mean the ACH takes a step back on some things in exchange for other voices taking a step forward.
Thanks, Liz. And I heard that a little bit in what Holly was suggesting around really listening and supporting and trusting the leadership, a different type of dance partner, a different type of leadership from the ACH. And also just, thinking a little bit, Alex, of this time to act. How do we move from action? And I'm kind of offer up the second question that David named, which is, what would be one thing as we are starting to move in that you would really like to see the ACH be taking action? What does that look like? What would we start to be realizing? How would we know that we're really making progress around more equitable well-being in the North Sound? If you have thoughts on that, and I'll loop back to you, Holly, first, if you don't mind.
So, one thing I'd be really excited to experience is seeing people of color have a stronger and more impactful voice in the communities that we live in and that we work in. And, I feel like it's important for people of color to have the ability to safely call out and confront racial injustice and discriminatory practices, particularly in the workplace. That's been something that I've been talking about with individuals in the community. And so this, I guess, to me, looks like holding employers accountable for racist practices and just an overall lack of investment in racial equity and diversity. And this goes along the lines with COVID too, of how people of color are disproportionately negatively affected by COVID-19. And so what would it look like to hold employers accountable? This could be a number of things. A couple of things that I've talked about with individuals in the community is looking at mediation, legal advocacy for employees experiencing racism in the workplace, and having an organization like the ACH with their influence and just clout backing individuals who often feel powerless for fear of job loss or being looked over for promotions, things like that. Could potentially really make a difference in making some tangible changes in workplace practices and really expanding racial equity and diversity. And even kind of taking a step back even further is looking at factors that prevent people of color from being in positions of leadership in organizations, and really looking at how these barriers can be addressed and remedied. I think this would help ensure that people of color can be represented much more in leadership positions, which I think could bring about a lot of change in the community.
Thanks for those examples, Holly. How about you, Alex? Taking action on what fronts? What does that start to look like? What changes would you or experience?
I think there's different ways of going about it, and there's different levels depending on the organization and the capacity that they have. For example, I really think that it never hurts to have more trainings and folks that actually contribute to opening up space for these kind of conversations. And that's an opportunity for employers and other staff members to realize what's been going on. You know, many people actually don't have negative intentions, but they're doing microaggressions all day long, you know, or they're just saying things in a way that makes many other people uncomfortable. And many people of color feel that they have to stay quiet because they don't want to bring up certain things that potentially are going to be, you know, a cause for somebody to be bullied or take negative action, or if they have an employer where it's not really supportive that they're going to take, then, you know, take that as a negative thing to do. So I honestly think that we need to encourage organizations and employers to have more open spaces to be talking about these things, because many times there's people that realize these things and good changes come out of it. And there's some that don't want to change, and you can't really focus on that, but at least you do the attempt to offer that space in your workplace where you actually can talk about these things, because it's a long road and it takes a lot of effort to change adults' mindsets. And it's been going for so long that it's embedded in people's brain and it's uncomfortable to consider change. So another approach that I strongly believe is that we need to find ways to focus on the youth and mentor youth to become more active in different areas where they actually can be mentored to be the next leaders and next people where they can take leadership positions. So I find it easier to mentor and to support the youth to realize, you know, how you have to be, the type of mentality that you have to have in order to be able to reach certain positions and take opportunities when they come to being in a leadership position. Because I see a lot of adults that you can explain things, you can give a lot of evidence, and they still don't even want to consider anything, right? So if we focus on youth, I think we have a better chance than in 5-10 years, we're going to have a complete different mindset where at least some people have a voice, you know, because many people complain and don't really do anything about it. So now we can give a chance to youth, be like, you are the next generation, you're the people that are going to influence the next generation behind you to think differently, to have respect for others, to see people, as humans, not to divide each other. Like, how can we unite? How can we learn from each other? I'm sorry that I said that comment to you that makes you feel uncomfortable, because we all do it. This is not about dividing who's better or who's less. You know, we all do it to some extent. And we have to stop and realize that many times it's okay for somebody to tell us, like, that made me feel uncomfortable. Yeah. I think that was racist. We need to have those conversations. Like, as people of color, many topics you can't talk about.
We're going to have just a moment of sharing. And Kim, I'm going to invite you first, since Liz is going to segue into a little bit more about where we all see this going. So Kim, I want to invite you to share some of the themes and stories that may have come from the last panel that you were involved in.
Well, how did I get so lucky? You know, I think it was really about understanding, you know, Jackie says it so much better than I certainly could, but where we've come from, and then thinking about how do we move forward. And certainly Yuki kind of focused on moving to action. I mean, we can spend a lot of time in conversation and learning from one another, but if we don't make change and take action, then, you know, it kind of is a fruitless endeavor. And boy, I think, you know, the ability and the willingness and desire to learn from one another and to collaborate in kind of how we move forward to not just improve lives, but decrease mortality in certainly people of color in the 5 counties, but for everyone that is marginalized at this point.
Great. Thank you for sharing and lifting up those themes. Liz.
I was going to say, David, I know we've been going back and forth as Liz was indicating. We had a great conversation. Alex was kind of summing up, I think, collectively, some places that Holly was lifting up. And I wonder if we just want to take a moment to allow Alex to just maybe take a minute to kind of sum the type of change you were talking about. And Holly, if you don't mind, and then we can pass it to Liz.
Yeah, so the approach, I think it was two main points that I was mentioning is one, continuing this type of path that the ACH is doing, providing spaces where we can all collaborate and share ways of continuing efforts to do this and making it comfortable to people to feel uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is that opening up to new conversations that before were conversations we didn't want to have, and change that mindset that it's okay to talk about certain situations that makes us uncomfortable, because we all say or do things that makes other people uncomfortable. And many times we don't have a negative intention, but we just don't know that by saying a certain thing, using a certain tone, or using certain jokes, we do microaggressions against each other or against other people. So we just need to open those kind of conversations and offer some type of training or spaces in our workplaces where we can actually engage and have these conversations in a meaningful way where we respect each other. And it's not about dividing or about, who's better than who. It's just about treating us as humans, as people, not just dividing each other. And the second point that I brought up is that I feel that we have a better chance to making good changes down the road if we focus on empowering youth to become the next leaders and the next people to engage in high positions where they can actually do good changes. And the reason for that is because I honestly believe that it's really hard to change the mindset of adults. And especially because there's a lot of embedded information and thoughts that's been going on for many years. And even if you have examples and evidence in front of them, they still don't want to open up to change or to move, their thought process of how they see things. So I think we have a better chance of actually encouraging youth and mentor them and find ways to push them to actually take the next step and be part of the next group of folks that are going to actually make good changes 5-10 years from now, because the thing that they're going to be doing is going to be impacting the next generation behind them. So, it could take time, because it's been so long that we haven't had this focus on trying to be better and open about these kind of issues. So I think now we can actually focus more on youth. I think youth really need to know that there's better ways to treat each other, and there's better ways to actually have a voice, and that their voice is important. And the easiest way to make good changes is by having the right people in key leadership positions. Because we can complain all day long, but if we're not doing anything ourselves or empowering others that could have a voice for us, then nothing's going to change.
Thank you, Alex. And Liz, I believe you're going to share a little bit with us about what you all have been working on with the partners in creating a craft and a vision around the future state and where we see ourselves going as a collaborative.
Yeah, and and it probably is a good bridge from Alex's summary to this piece, because I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning things, and it really is this notion. But if we're not going to do something with what we learn, like how do we just like create the impetus for action out of this learning process? So our board, and if this didn't get introduced, Kim Williams from Providence is our board chair, and I just have felt so, it's been amazing to have her as a leader on the board, and because she is really also pushing this work from a governance perspective. And so about 6 or 7 months ago, the board asked our team to craft a draft strategic plan for what does the ACH focus on looking forward. We're part of a 5-year Medicaid project, but we also started before these 5 years, and our 5 years end at the end of 2021. And so what you're seeing is one slide out of a 90-minute presentation that we did with the board about 2 weeks ago that summarizes like what we see as the key functions. And I'm going to ask Nicole to step in and talk about kind of these functions, how COVID has impacted them and how they've impacted our thoughts around both equity and targeted universalism and how we use those. So Nicole, do you want to jump in at this point?
Yeah, sure thing. Can you all hear me? Good. Okay. So as Liz shared, we have a lot of other slides that we could have put in here, but we're going to stick to this one for right now. And one of the things that has, I think I'll just briefly share about this North Sound ACH 3.0 is that this has been a conversation and truly I would say even in the beginning. So when Linda shared her early participation this morning, I think the conversation around where we headed has been on the table for a long time. And often in planning process, we say that we're, data, research, and community informed in our strategic direction. And in our case, I would add our board members, our partners, our staff, researching, other ACHs, our peers, subject matter experts, state agencies, our successes, but as Rick shared this morning, more importantly, our failures have really informed kind of what you're looking at right now. It's important to see that in the middle there you see equity, and we believe that it's the foundation for all of our work today and moving forward. It's the umbrella, it's the foundation, it's the thread. And during our board meeting, Liz shared a really insightful quote from Nicole Maher, who's the president of Group Health Foundation. And she said that we need leadership, solutions, and structure that match who Washington is today and are getting ready for who Washington is tomorrow. 1 in 3 people is a people of color and or an immigrant. 47% of children who go to public schools are people of color. Those newborn to 5 years old are the most diverse portion of the Washington's population. We need to imagine a state that is ready for all of those people to lead and design the future we want for ourselves. So I would say, Liz, maybe we've been with our future state group who's been also helping, many of you are on the call, helping shape and mold where these sort of 6 focus areas, or what we're calling solution areas, have kind of evolved over time. And so I'll just start and kind of walk through, and I'll share one example that I think is a good one to show how our current work is impacting it and how COVID has kind of brought some things to light. So the first one is invest, and that's so with a little key. This is the sort of looking into being a backbone support for regional funding, looking for opportunities to share infrastructure, managing grants, cloud-based resources, human resources and finance, and training and technical assistance. Some of this, as I'm speaking, you'll know we are doing elements of this, and I think that that's something that was important, that this is not building from scratch. Often strategic plans that I've been a part of, we've started over, clean slate, and that's not where we started from, and that wasn't what our board and our partners have expressed. And Yuki, you said it earlier in the breakout session that I was just in with you, like you got to take action now, and starting from scratch is not where we think we need to be. The second area is informed action, really looking at improving the ways we use data and how do we identify emerging issues, assets, and opportunities for resource sharing, getting regional information to decision makers in a timely manner. And I like to think about getting the right information to the right people at the right time. Building capacity, active engagement of community leaders and stakeholders. Looking for opportunities to operationalize a shared vision and goals of projects, looking at allocating resources collectively, and building a way to exchange resources with each other. Catalysts for change. Continuing this journey of being a trusted convener, a space where ideas can generate and evolve. Also being, looking for system problem solvers and system disruptors, fostering risk-taking and collaborative partnerships. Fifth area is elevate emerging issues. Leverage knowledge to address the region's current and emerging complexities that will cross clinical and social issues, including those that will advance equity and address privilege and structural racism. And then the last one is braided efforts. This is, I think why this is in a visual of a circle is really implementing multiple strategies or multiple solutions to address these complex challenges is really our greatest, has the greatest potential for the maximum positive change and community impact. So, you know, doing catalysts for change with informed action, that's when you get some real powerful, from using data to inform the work that you're doing. I mentioned, you know, we've been talking a bit about the events of COVID and the calls to action for social and racial justice. They have really impacted our work. I would say it's both reaffirmed the path we're on and then elevated certain solutions that we didn't anticipate stepping into for about another year. But because of our structure, we were able to respond swiftly, both looking at COVID needs for public health and then also working with organizations that support communities of color and leaning more into the racial justice. And I'll just kind of, I'll share a bit of like what does this actually look like? So for braided efforts, if I think about the work that we're doing right now, that has to do with trainings, bridging organizations, bringing subject matter experts to the region, cross ACH advocacy, HCA contract work, space for collaboration, kind of a bunch of them all working together. And for COVID response specifically, you know, this is around, we've been doing some capacity building, some elevating emerging issues and investing. And ACH has been asked several times to assist with cloth mask distribution. And this is one of those funny stories where I've told Liz we will laugh about this in the future when somehow I was able to secure 2.4 million masks that are coming to the region. So those of you who have filled out the request form, they are coming. More than we wanted, but they're coming. And then safety net funding for COVID response and partners, bridging partners and supporting public health response. For the future, in looking at what braided efforts could look like together, using equity lens to support racial and social justice efforts, regional contractor from DOH or other state agencies, establishing learning communities, regional advocacy and policy change, fiscal agent for aligned nonprofits to share in operation costs, and a nonprofit arm for public health. I mentioned before, this is not a strategic direction that started from scratch. It really feels like a natural progression. It really does feel like we've piloted some things and we've bombed on some things, and but we've also learned and to kind of revisit and look back, and also now looking forward, which goes to Jackie Julian shared how we in our last breakout how octopus has become our sort of mascot, and as Liz shares, it's one of the things that they can move in multiple directions and at the same time, and so you know, we kind of stick to that because I think that helps us develop a model like this that really reflects where we believe you all would like to be heading, and you know, I'm really looking forward to this. And Liz, now I think you're going to share maybe a nicer visual that really goes into a bit more detail and shares also this future state.
Yeah, so probably a couple of things that I would mention. So, you know, there is just like a bunch of detail underneath this. And we presented the draft to the board 2 weeks ago, and you are going to be asked questions probably between now and the end of September before we refine this and take it to the board for approval in December. But there isn't anything that is in this plan that partners didn't tell us. It's important that you have this in your plan. This was really something that didn't come from us. It came from input that we have gotten from a number of you over the last year or so. So if we could go to the next slide. I'm a visual person. So, you know, one of the asks that I had as we were doing all of this work was, could we actually put together a visual that describes what would the North Sound look like if indeed we were doing the work that we wanted to be doing. And so we worked with a group called Explain. Their expertise is in taking really complex information and making visuals out of it. And I just, you know, you will get this sent to you. And I know that it's going to be hard to read some of the detail just on a screen. But on the left-hand side is just like a step further detail in what Nicole just described, kind of what we see as some of the key things that we're doing with community and with community partners. In the small print above where it says healthy, resilient communities is the language of the North Sound ACH land acknowledgement statement. The trees that have the signage on them, those are the logos for each of the 8 tribes in the region. And the people are kind of doing a number of different things, including welcoming the canoe that is coming in. There are some things that are incredibly important imagery that, you know, both the orca, the salmon going upstream, the eagle flying across the mountains. These were all things that partners worked on. Our tribal alignment committee gave input on to try and actually create a visual that reflects the North Sound region. And really it's on the right-hand side where we think of the things that are driving our work. And so, you know, starting with recognizing and honoring tribal sovereignty to, you know, really getting to our goals around equity, well-being, belonging. But one of the board in June is that it was time to change our mission statement, and it was time for us to actually craft a vision. And our mission statement from 2014 forward has been focused on improving the health of the people who live in the 5 counties in the North Sound region. And what you see in that purple box in the middle is really a combination of our vision and mission statement, that we think it's incredibly important that North Sound talks about advancing equity, social justice, belonging, and well-being, and that allows us the space to be moving into these conversations about the impact of race, the impact of COVID, because we have been, I think, collectively on a tribal and equity learning journey now for about 2.5 years. And if all of our partners don't understand what's happening with the 8 tribes in the region, if they don't understand what's happening in the Latinx community and the African American community and the Asian community and on, we can't actually say that we're doing the work around that if we're not also elevating and hearing from those communities to tell us what's important for us to be focused on. So this is a piece that is also, even though it looks final, we have the ability, kind of after getting your input, and we'll be asking for your input in some specific ways, to do one more revision of this in the fall before we include this with our packet to the board. So it's kind of our entree for how we're thinking about the work ahead of us, both for us as a team, but for us and all of our partners. And so, David, I don't know, we have like 1 minute if there's any time to ask for any reactions, but this is we're going to talk some more about this tomorrow, but just a snapshot on how the ACH is thinking about its future state.
Yeah, Liz, thank you for that. I'd say if there are those who need to hop off, feel free, but if there are those who want to ask a question and hear a response or two, it sounds as if we have an opening for that. Any questions, reactions, responses to what you heard from both Liz and Nicole? There is a question in the chat that says, where would advocacy fit in this diagram? I think this came up when Nicole was reading hers. The youth need to be empowered to treat others with dignity and respect and see each equally regardless of race, gender, or color of our skin. So I think the main question is around advocacy as a key element.
Yeah. So advocacy, it fits in a couple of different places, and at least from my breakout, I think it'll resonate. It fits under being a catalyst for change, that obviously we're actually moving towards how do we become a change agent and the work that needs to occur. But I think it's also in the elevating emerging issues. How do we get community to be a part of this power dynamic at play of raising things? And then in the investment piece where we're talking about capacity building, both capacity building for partners for the youth convening, which again, you'll hear about more tomorrow, that how we invest our dollars is also an advocacy tool. What is it that we're trying to build in terms of community capacity? So it's kind of in a multitude of places, but we see the ACH that if we're going to play this role, it isn't necessarily that it's the ACH advocating for something, but that we have provided enough resources that the right people can be effective advocates. And maybe it's us and others. And sometimes maybe it's not us, but it is others. And how do we provide the support for that to occur?
Great. Couple of other comments. Is there a master list of names and contact information for all who attended this meeting? And then Mike says, I like the use of pictures to represent complex ideas, like the opening poem where climate had a dual meaning. Pictures help convey dual and multi-layered meanings.
And yes, if there's no objection, we obviously have everybody who registered and can get that shared when we start sharing out the summary information.
All right, a number of thank yous to Alex, to ACH, to one another. Thank you for sharing this knowledge. So that's what's coming up from the chat. Liz, I'm not sure if you want to hold on longer, but we've come to the end of our stated runway, but more than happy to do what feels appropriate at this moment.
Yeah, and just, really just again, recognizing how much everybody's got on their plates. Just really appreciate you carving out the time for this, and look forward to tomorrow.